with us. So I got a message over the weekend from a gentleman who described himself as being a friend and associate of Mark Bakita. Mark Bakita's a good guy, strong conservative, fighting very, very hard for Ohio. He ran for Senate, as you know, of course. And he wanted to bring to my attention HB 472, which is essentially an election bill or a voting rights bill or a voting rules bill, depending on whom you speak with, I suppose. But it's being described as something that would tighten the voter ID laws, allow hand counting of ballots in certain cases, and require voting machines and electric poll books to meet strict cybersecurity rules for obviously the protection of the election integrity. This proposal comes a year after, according to the Cincinnati Enquirer, after Mike DeWine signed into law House Bill 458, which enacted the photo ID requirement and other changes to the voting process. So some are calling this one of the strictest voter ID laws in the country, and some say it still needs to be stricter. So joining us now is Marcell. Marcell, I'm going to guess that the pronunciation of that last name, the spelling made it a little rough on me. Strbich? Am I saying it correctly?
You got it.
Strbich.
Yeah,
good to talk to you. Yeah, I appreciate that. I apologize for not knowing ahead of time, but this is the first time we've spoken. I do appreciate the messaging we've been able to send back and forth. So let's dive into this. Tell us more about HB 472.
It's a consequential bill. It's a constituency-driven bill. We really look at the systemic issues that have been present for probably the greater part of 20 years. And it goes about really hitting upon a hot topic issue right now with citizenship and identity verification. And in particular, we're able to solidify and shore up that verification to occur prior to the issuance of any voter IDs and assignment. And that's really the challenge today, on that issue. Also, it enhances the cybersecurity standards for systems that certify in our state. We're using a 2005 standard going into the 2024 election. And what we do is we place it in the hands of the Adjutant General, and we ensure that a military-grade certification review is required before any voting system is even certified in our state. And we have the ability to do that because in 2019, we passed a bill here in Ohio that created what is the Cyber Reserve, which is an all-volunteer, credential-vetted group of people and professionals who are prepared. And we applied a high degree of standard that critical infrastructure systems are currently subject to in the DoD. And so we're bringing that high level of standard here, and we're upgrading, I guess you could say, 19 years, and bringing a level of security as well within the voter registration database. But we're happy to delve into any of those and give your audience a sense of why it's needed.
Well, yeah. First, I think I would like to know who would possibly oppose, strengthening of the election integrity rules, making sure that all votes are counted. That they like to say, one person, one vote. I agree, one person, one vote. We need to make sure that A, that person is registered, B, that person only votes once, and to make sure that these people are legal. Why would anybody oppose something like the types of measures we're talking about?
Not really for good measure, other than to kind of bring up old arguments. I mean, we are taking what, in effect, is the recommendation coming from an executive order filed in 2021, improving the nation's cybersecurity. And so, Bob, it says that we need to perform enhanced vendor risk assessment. And what that means is we have to get a handle on the third-party capability developers who our vendors are leaning upon, who are determined to already be subject to foreign ownership, control, and influence. And so what we do is we ensure that that information gets disclosed so that we understand and the vendors know what to expect before they come to the table. And when they provide that information, if there is a security vulnerability in the supply chain, what's different from the past, most of this you may recognize as people talk about this as well. If it's not connected to the internet, then it's not an issue. Well, cyber attack methods have evolved significantly from the 2006 law that originally said that the voting machines cannot be connected to the internet. We've also got new voting systems and products. And if you look at this, we can't rely on the federal government and an agency, in this case, the Election Assistance Commission, that has no statutory authority and uses a set of voluntary voter system guidelines that is non-enforceable. And so the vendors themselves, if they adhere to or don't adhere to it, nobody can quality control or check that. The workforce is not there yet, but will be after this law is passed, to start to build that level of cybersecurity professional. And we would have the strongest enhanced vendor risk standards. And on top of it, we would be aligning with, for example, let's say a leftist center, think tank like the Brennan Center of Justice that calls for greater election vendor oversight. The difference is we don't believe that it should be at the federal government. We don't want to turn our elections over to them. We can handle it and attest to it more here at the state level because we have the pieces in place.
Marcell, what does the Secretary of State say about this?
I think he's looking at it thoughtfully. He says some things are good. We want to help and work with him through this process as he evaluates it. We recognize that this is very consequential, and it would be involving bringing a third-party security developer. He's relied extensively on his board of voting machine examiners. The challenge we found with that group is that they are not cyber credentialed. They're election officials performing a dual-hatted role. And when you look at the work that they do, they look at a system that comes to them for certification from functional capability or operability. That's the way our laws have been written since 2004. But our law is not written in any sense to address the issue of security. So we saw that as the gap. We went right at that, and we took the best standards we could find, the most up-to-date standards that the federal government and our agencies, in this case, National Security Agency, Department of National Intelligence, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. And we said they are saying that developers can do more and they have to do more, and we incorporated that into this legislation.
So, and I'm glad to hear that the Secretary of State is considering this. But he does say, and I'm looking at the article that you sent me from the USA Today Ohio Bureau. I think I referenced it being a part of the Inquirer, but this is a network, so it can be read in a lot of other different newspapers. But it referenced what Secretary LaRose said, that it does have some good ideas, but other things are unworkable. I'd like to know how, what members of the General Assembly are working on that with him, and are they working with him? And then number two, I want to address some of what the ACLU said, again, quoted in this article, quote, "This totally upends our current election system in several different ways." This is the Deputy Policy Director for the ACLU of Ohio, Colin Marazzi, who said that. So kind of a two-part question there. Who's working with this, with the Secretary of State on this? And then secondly, we need to talk about the criticisms of the ACLU.
Yeah, thanks for thoughtfully bringing that up. Who's working are the two sponsors in the House. There are Representative Bob Peterson out of Spina and Representative Bernie Willis as well out of Springfield. And they're having those conversations, I understand, and we're also going to do sponsor testimony this Wednesday. We're opening it up in the Homeland Security Committee. Chairman of that is Faraz Gambari. And it's a committee that has quite a few either current and or former law enforcement or military personnel. So they should understand and take to some of the security aspects of this that we have to shore up. As far as what's been brought up about upending the process, I would put it to your audience like this, right, to directly address that. In 2022, Ohioans voted for a constitutional amendment unanimously, 78%, that only citizens should be allowed to vote in our election system. And we followed that up with a voter ID law the following year. And so we covered our basis in a lot of ways, but then we have this crisis now where we have a large influx of people who are first-time applicants. And I want to kind of just give your audience a description of where this kind of loophole kind of comes into play. So we know from the Department of Public Safety that there's over 236,000 issued statewide IDs and driver's license credentials to non-citizens. And if I am somebody who's come into this country through the border and I'm facilitated to Ohio, right, by the Department of Homeland Security, and then I have an app called CBP1, I'm already set for applying for social services. Well, when I come into a state agency, federal law since 1993 tells me I'm an employee, I have to offer a voter registration application to a non-citizen. And whether that citizen willingly knows it, in many cases they do not because they don't yet understand the criteria of citizenship, and if the person who's describing it to them is not thorough in that explanation, they potentially sign and fill that form out. The Board of Motor Vehicles or the state agency is going to forward that information. They're not going to determine the eligibility to vote. That's not their job. But they'll forward it to the election administration officials to process. And what we've uncovered is because we do not have a comprehensive database of non-citizens in our state, our County Board of Elections, which is the entry point, has no means or access for citizenship records, then they forward that to the SOS. And the SOS makes a determination and runs a check with the Board of Motor Vehicles. But they're going to assign them eligibility in the interim because they don't perform that citizenship check prior to the assignment of eligibility. And so voila, from there, non-citizens are entered into a county voter roll, and those non-citizens will appear in our e-poll books if they go through the process of simply using that CBP at One app, because you can apply through last four, and that verification isn't going to happen until after the fact when we run our annual non-citizen audit. And that is essentially the reason why they can also vote for mail-in absentee ballots, because our voter ID law that was passed in 2023 doesn't require a submission or a copy of an ID. So as you can see, this process to do the verification is riddled with holes. And how many of those 236,000, which we understand is growing by about 1,000 a month as far as issued credentials, is going to be or is registered? We don't know that, because those questions kind of have to come out of the annual non-citizen audit, and that audit isn't going to cover these scenarios that I just described to you.
And even so, it would be after the fact, like you said, which is extraordinarily important as well. We're talking with Marcell Strbich. Marcell is a 20-year Air Force intelligence officer with joint staff experience in force modernization, and he validates information systems, does network threat analysis, and he sees all kinds of threats to the voting network here in the state of Ohio. We typically, this is just a general question, we typically hear the Secretary of State, and this is not a knock on Frank LaRose, whom I spoke with about this a little bit last week, but that this is the gold standard. You know, Ohio didn't have the problems that they had in Georgia, that they had in Arizona, that they had in a lot of the other states that led to the questions and irregularities, or whatever you want to call them. I call them fraud, quite frankly, but in those states in 2020. But Ohio's a gold standard. Ours was flawless. That's what we hear. That's not what you're saying, though, is it?
Well, what I'm saying is that we have some safeguards we have to implement, and we have to do it very soon. We've got the general election, of course, coming in, and we want all people. And I went overseas in many years, and I ensured or fought to ensure that those people of those nations had the ability to choose fairly and freely and securely their elected officials. And so when I come back here and I retire now, and I see this, I don't want to see a loss of voter confidence. And that's really what it comes down to. How much do we have to pay to fix some of these means or access issues so that we can bring confidence back? And if we can bring transparency, Bob, into the mix, which is what this bill's really trying to do, we'll build oversight over it from a citizenry standpoint, and then we'll have accountability that way. And so that is part of what I think needs to be understood and recognized. And so, yes, we want to expand upon the work they've been doing at the Secretary of State's office, and we think that this is a sure bet to secure and start to restore voter confidence.
Yeah, which is of course the key issue here is voter confidence. Can we trust that the votes that we cast are going to be counted, and that they are only ours are going to be counted, that non-citizens are not going to be counted, and so on and so forth. The complaints, again, let's go to a little bit more of what the ACLU is complaining about. They're saying that, quote, hand counting has been upheld by people who are perpetuating disinformation as a more accurate way to run elections. This came from the policy affairs manager for the League of Women Voters. The ACLU, as I noted, they're saying that these are unfunded mandates. It's going to overwork and overstress elections workers. Can you respond to some of those, Marcell?
Sure. I mean, in 2010, our state afforded counties the choice to opt in to the use of the voting system and method of their choice. Mm-hmm. And what this bill or provision is doing is it's applying that equivalency standard, right? And an equivalency standard in terms of how you verify someone is important, and how you afford the county. So if you want to put it in a different light, if there's an emergency or a contingency situation where there's a disruption to connectivity at a site, should a county be able to step into and perform a function that still ensures that our election can go forward? I think so. I think that's a fair assessment. And, if, for example, I know that organization has been a big proponent of constitutional amendments, and the electorate speaking out, and that has been a common refrain. Would that not apply here? I mean, this would not automatically result in each county undertaking that. It would require a petition ballot, which isn't that the fundamental of democracy? People speaking out. If we're a ground-up election state, which is what we're often cited as, then we should also have that right at the county level to opt in, especially if there are conditions or high threats that persist in our system, and we don't have that level yet of trust needed. A county can go forward and set up their own path that's already equivalent to Ohio law. So I think if that would be the answer I would give back is, self-determination. It's the counties that run it. They're the ones that would be able to meet the requirements that the Secretary of State puts forward, then I don't think it's an issue.
You mentioned the primary sponsors. We're talking to Marcell Strbich, and we're talking about Ohio elections and what we can do to strengthen and support true election integrity in this state. There's a huge bill. It's a very important one. It's HB 472. You mentioned the sponsors, Bernard Willis and Bob Peterson, and there's a host of co-sponsors. But what about leadership? According to the article that you shared with me, Jason Stevens is considering the bill, reviewing the bill, assigning it to a committee. But do you know if this is something that he supports, that if it gets out of committee that he will call for a full House vote? And also, Marcell, do you know if there's a companion on the Senate side?
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So the sponsors are having continuous dialogue, and they've had receptive conversations from all parties, even in the Senate. We are expecting greater interest, and there is an understanding and on the Senate side that this bill has been introduced, and I think there's strong consideration right now for introducing an equivalency bill. So we know that, with this having been dropped in early April, we already have the committee. It's a reputable committee and a reputable chairman who can understand the challenges of our times. If we don't act now, here's what really happens. Ohio continues to certify standards going back to, at most to 2021, which is what the voluntary guidelines are from the federal side. And so that's not going to ensure confidence. And we're not going to develop our cyber reserve to the extent that we could. Of course, Secretary of State was a big proponent. We're glad he was. It's important to have that. And our Adjutant General certainly is somebody that would take an interest in this as well, and that would expand upon their mission. And as far as, as brought up earlier about the unfunded mandate and resources, there are fund and budget vehicles in place for this. What price tag do we want to put on this? And what are the user resource requirements? That's the question that those who would challenge this would want to make, right? Do we want to have people come back and have trust and confidence in these systems? Is it worth $5 million? I think it would be. Just throwing that number out there, but just to kind of emphasize the point, if you lose the confidence and trust in this, and then what do we have, right? What is our guiding star going forward?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And, I asked you about the Senate side. I asked you about whether or not Stevens is going to be supporting this if it gets out of committee. But then we have to get it to the governor's desk. And according to the article, Dan Tierney, the spokesman for Mike DeWine, said that lawmakers, quote, can't keep going back to that well with further bills dealing with the same thing in a different way without different fact patterns. It doesn't sound like Governor DeWine would be very interested in signing such a bill anyway. Am I reading that right or wrong?
Well, I think somebody contacted him. Perhaps they had not even read it, or we certainly hadn't discussed it with him at this level. I think it's kind of working its way through the legislature, and we certainly welcome that type of engagement. But as far as the fact patterns, there's no fact pattern that aligns to what previously was passed in that sense from 473. We're talking about a total revamp of security certification standards that get evaluated. We're looking at this not from connectivity to the internet for a voting machine. We're looking at this from the supply chain, which arguably is even more important in understanding how the system was built, by whom, its design, and its functionality to incorporate security planning into it. So that is a different fact pattern that I would share with him or anybody on their staff. And it would certainly set Ohio as a national model. There's also the feature of blockchain, which we incorporate into databases. That's a different fact pattern. What we would be doing there is we would be ensuring that if any adversary tried to gain access, as they've done on a number of occasions since 2016, and exfiltrated information, we would have knowledge to know if anybody altered our voter record. We would be using the latest commercial technology used in the finance industry And that would start the process of being able to help us recreate whatever alteration occurred, and we could also recover our systems if somebody had to access them. That's a key feature as well within this legislation. So, if we're going to stay with voting systems, and this bill thinks we will for a number of reasons, then we might as well put what resources we need and focus we need to ensure that the standards are not from 2005, that we can at least operate on a high level with 2024 standards, and we can do that through a statewide standard.
Last question for you, Marcell, and I really appreciate this wealth of information you're dropping on us this morning. It's very, very helpful. I think it was Bernard Willis, one of the two co-sponsors, who said that this could be a national model on how to make sure that elections are safe in every other state as well. Do you know of if any other states are considering similar legislation? Is there anything like that happening, or are we kind of out in front on this all on our own?
We are out in front, as Ohio should be and has been in the past. We are looking at, when we talk about those security assessment standards, we talk about blockchain. Those are conversations that happen on a high level with think tanks that are looking at where they're going. In the future, industry is going to want to push elections into an open source software. Well, here's something we need to be considerate of. If industry in a few years goes that direction, which will be more cost effective for them, then the management of all the software of our voting systems is not going to be done by that vendor anymore. They turn that over because it's open source software and it's managed by a community of folks. It'll be turned over to the state of Ohio. Are we ready to assume software security review of the voting system software? Because that could be a reality within a few years. So if we punt on this is the time to do it, because we're in an election season, people are paying attention. Even if the security side of this bill doesn't implement by November, which it will not, but even if it takes a year from the time that the governor signs this, we will be in great shape, and I can guarantee that other states are going to start to come to Ohio and ask how we're doing. It would not surprise me if other states, there are a few, start to develop their own cyber reserves and build all volunteer civilian or permanent workforce to start the process of building this verification. And we very much think this is the future, Bob, and we hope that our leaders in our states see that, and we certainly will work with all of them to help them understand it.
It just seems, Marcell, like a hell of a high mountain to climb, though, because the opposition to this is going to be fierce, especially in some of the other states if they try to model theirs after what we are trying to do here. Because, I mean, they rely upon opportunities to cheat. And I'm sorry to be so blatant about it, but they do. And I think particularly the people on the left know that they have to be able to account for the fact that maybe the type of trash that they're trying to force upon the American people, or the people of Ohio in our case, might not be something that they're interested in. And therefore, they need to have a secondary option. They cannot just rely on the people to do what they want them to do. If they vote against them, they have to find a way. So you're trying to restore or develop election integrity that is going to be a very, very big problem for them. And so I feel like the obstacles are going to be multitudinous, and they're going to be huge in front of you. So I'm glad you guys are out in front of it now and on top of this, and I look forward to following the progress of HB 72 going forward. And thank you so much for the time.
It's been great speaking with you. Thank you,
you as well. Thank you so much. You understand, everybody, right? This is a very, very strong bill. It would eliminate so many of the different ways that the left can cheat. And therefore, the left will defend the current system, the one that allows them to cheat, by way of mail-in, by way of drop boxes, by way of online, insecure cyber systems with respect to the voting machines. All of these things that they can do to cheat, if they can, they are going to want to keep in place. So this will be a very, very hard thing, I think, to get passed. And I really have no faith whatsoever that Mike DeWine would do the right thing if it got to his desk. So we'll follow it and see where it goes.